This episode is sponsored by Wix Studio.
When is the last time you listened to a podcast about web development, web design, and small business and didn't fall asleep? Yes, we cover web development, web design, and small business, but like actual human beings with personalities. If you're a beginner, we're not going to talk over your head. It's more like asking your buddy for help. We have guests, we have fun, and let me tell you, these two can get off on a tangent. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to HTML All the Things Podcast. This is Matt Lawrence and Mike Coran.
That's it, everybody. We are back. This is the HTML All the Things Podcast. This week, we're going to be talking about something interesting, intriguing, funny, sad. No. We're going to be talking about asynchronous work. It's synchronous versus asynchronous work. This episode is titled Async Work for Web Developers, Revolution or Redundancy. So basically the thought is that async work, like some people think like if you're doing async work, hey, you're not there for meetings, you're not there for, I can't tap you on the shoulder, you're not in your cubicle, this is a mess. Other people think, hey, if I'm synced up, I'm wasting a bunch of time. Like it's a lot of commuting, it's a lot of this, it's a lot of that. So we're going to get into all that. We're going to get into that into this episode. We're going to talk about what synchronous work is, what asynchronous work is, and then we're going to kind of take the bits and pieces from that conversation, and we're going to talk about does async work for web developers based on our prior conversation at that point. So if this sounds interesting to you and you want to support the show, you can go and check us out on that Patreon, leave a review or rating on your podcast app, join us in our Discord server, or share this with your friends. And I have a really weird thing that I thought of doing live right there, but I didn't do. I just watched Hamlet from like 1941 or 1946, which is really random, but I just watched Hamlet from like 1940s. And I was going to do like a, if this sounds interesting to you, and try to do like a Shakespearean thing. But then I didn't know how to like make it Shakespearean because I don't speak Old English. So.
Okay. You old Matt. I can picture you in the Shakespearean clothing though. The tights and the weird puffy shirts.
It's happened. I've done in the tights, but I've been in the puffy shirts. I was in a play or like something in elementary school. I think it was a presentation thing. And yeah. And then, actually, this is a programming thing too. We didn't want to do the same presentation as everybody else. So what we had to do is we had to choose like a type of essay, like argumentative essay, whatever, but it wasn't an essay. So it was like, you choose one of the types of essay, argumentative, whatever, like there's a whole bunch of them. There's only one I can think of off the top of the head, because that's what we did. And what we did was we had to present points on behalf of a character in an argumentative way in front of the class, like for presentation wise. So I used Visual Basic and programmed a judge, and we dressed up as lawyers, and that's how we presented to the class.
Holy shit.
It was pretty wild, like that, but that's what we did. We like presented the case, and you clicked a button, and then like the case like flew toward the judge, and then the judge would reply with his argument back.
Wow.
So that's a bit of a random one, but that was English class.
Yeah, that's a super random thing to do for English. Did you guys ace it at least?
Oh no, because it didn't work the first day, so we like lost 10%. That's life. That's the way it goes. I'll take the 90 though. That's fine with me. But today we're talking about. We're not talking about Visual Basic, although I guess you could be. We're talking about synchronous versus asynchronous work, and we're going to start off with what is synchronous work. So synchronous work is the way it sounds, synchronous. It means you're working together at the same time. Now, this does not have to be in person. It's usually just common availability hours. That can be in person or remote, either one. And it basically means like, hey, if we are all remote, we all must remain online at the same time. We're going to go online. We're going to have, we have to remain on Slack, or we have to remain on Teams or something. And our availability must adhere to a 9 to 5 structure, or whatever the hours are that you're given. The thing here is that many people do get monitored, and they don't like that. That's going to be a big kind of like talking point, I think, later once we kind of break these things down, is many companies will put on like, I don't know what you can call them, but they're monitoring softwares, I guess, where it's like, hey, did they move their mouse? Are they moving? Or the classic, like, hey, your boss can just like turn on your webcam at any time, those type of things. So some people are very against synchronous work for those reasons. I want to be clear that that's not like the focus of this episode. Like, you can have synchronous work and you have to sign in 9 to 5, but it doesn't have to be like that strict. Like, that's not a strict part of synchronous work. And I just wanted to make that clear. And obviously synchronous also makes sense in an office. So like, let's say like everyone in your team must show up to the office, you know, show up at 9, leave at 5, same type of thing. You're all synchronous, you're in person now, that type of thing. The examples of sort of synchronous tasks are, again, going in and staying in the office for the same time frame, in-person meetings, video conferencing, and then just general calls, whether you do, you know, sort of quick calls here and there with people on Zoom, Slack, Teams, the list goes on. Now, there's going to be some pros and some cons of synchronous work, of course. So let's dive into those. So pros. This is a weird one. And I found this online, and then I kind of like thought it through. It does make a lot of sense, and it's security. So security-centric conversations are often better said and not written. So people don't want to have like a digital trail left behind. And some people are even going to be so security conscious as to not even do it in a phone call. They're going to want to go into a secure building, like an office, go into a conference room with nothing recording, and then have some sort of secure conversation. And that doesn't have to be something illegal. Like, it sounds like you're a mobster, you know, creeping around or something. That's not necessarily the case. Like I've seen it in companies where people, like the higher ups and, you know, maybe just manager and up, go into a room and have a discussion about, unfortunately, who's going to get laid off. And they don't want that news to start getting around, or like what their decisions were and like why they decided that, and like when it's going to happen, those type of things. And it can also obviously be about security things like, hey, you know, our business is about to launch like a big product, and like do not want to talk about it in text, because what if somebody captures a screenshot, shares it on Facebook, then boom, you know, now they have a leak. So that is one pro. Now that's not a random pro, but it's a very sort of niche pro, we'll say. One of the big pros of synchronous work is that there's more immediate feedback. Someone's going to answer your phone call. They're going to answer your email. You tapped them on the shoulder, chances are they're going to feel it and then turn around and start talking to you right away. There's more immediate feedback. So if you have something, a task, or maybe your whole job is reliant on very quick, like, let's do this, let's do that, go, go, go. And that's not to say that asynchronous teams can't be fast, but I mean fast as in instant. Like, hey, we got to do this. An example might be, hey, we shouldn't probably have a 911 call center be asynchronous. Like, oh, I'll get to that 911 call in a bit. That's something that's like, yo, people got to answer the phone. They got to answer the call because like it's an emergency phone call, right? So, like, basically one of the pros is in this particular case is that it's more predictable, let's say, right? It's very predictable for that 911 operator to pick up the phone. And 911 is the emergency call thing for America and Canada, just an FYI if you don't have that. So very predictable, and it's predictable for the worker as well. So for example, an IT company, they may sell a maintenance package or something like that, where they need cover over particular hours. Synchronous work will allow them to make predictable shift scheduling. They'll be able to go in and say, okay, we need somebody from 10 to 6. So we're going to schedule these people from 10 to 6. That ensures that the customer for the IT company, has the support for the duration of their shift. But it's actually very good for the worker as well if that worker prefers or needs that type of stability. If the worker says, yo, you know what, like I hate kind of running around, not knowing like when I need to work. I don't like getting messages in the evening, whatever. If it's very sort of synchronous work and you have to be in the office, those type of things, synchronous work with very predictable shift scheduling, cannot say that, but very predictable shift scheduling is very good for workers like that. I'm going to move on here now to the cons. So let's do that. So the cons of synchronous work. So time zone. Time zone limitations dictate that most workers will be in the same or very similar time zone because obviously most people are going to want to sleep at night, be awake during the day. Now this of course can vary. Some people want to be up all night and stay up, whatever. The point of the matter is that this is a con because it limits your talent pool. Generally, when you throw out like, hey, we're hiring, usually you're hiring locally if you're a synchronous business. Hey, we'll hire within a 2-hour time zone difference, because maybe some person's going to start at 11 while everyone starts at 9, but it's the same time, right? Because of the time zone shift. But it's going to be weird if someone has to start at 4 in the morning or whatever, right? Again, unless they're okay with that, but there's going to be so few people okay with that, that your pool for hiring is going to be limited. And so that's unfortunate, right? There might be a great candidate that is in a quote unquote weird time zone in comparison to yours. And then you're going to be like, well, shoot, like, we're screwed. Like, I'm not going to make this person work every single day from 9 p.m. to 9 a.m. every single time. Like that sounds ridiculous. So your talent pool is going to be limited for hiring. Also, obligatory hours force people to show up even when there isn't work for them to do. Again, this is a con, right? So think about this. So, some workers like the predictability. We said that as a pro, but those workers hopefully and better have work to do. And this is a con of synchronous work, is that it's very difficult to ensure that everyone has work to do, especially when we're in a team. So for example, if 2 workers show up for 9 to 5 in an office, worker 1, they have one task, and that task is going to take 6 hours, but it is a blocking task, and it's blocking worker 2. Well, worker 2 receives their work after 6 hours of doing nothing and is now due to leave in 3 hours. And, whether or not you're going to want to pay overtime or have this person stay later, whatever, the work, like the list goes on and on. It's like one person was very productive for 6 hours and is now, because they only had one task, going to not be productive for 2 hours. This other person was unproductive for 6 hours and you paid them to be there. And now they're only going to be productive for a scheduled 3 hours. So this is not only causing stress financially on the company because you're paying people not to do things, but it's also creating stress for the workers, because worker 2 is probably kind of like, tapping the watch, tapping their foot, like, I got to get this going. I got to get this going. And when they're finally able to start working on their task, once worker 1 is done, you better hope that they're going to be able to complete it in 3 hours, or it's going to go into the next day. And then, then now it's a whole other thing going on. And also, this is kind of a phenomenon that's happening lately. It creates this sort of culture of, well, I stayed late. Why didn't you? Why do you always leave work first at the end of the day? And that last statement is really important, because we've heard this. I think we maybe even talked about it on the show years ago at this point now, where it's like that thing where, let's say there's 9 cubicles, everyone's sitting around in cubicles, everyone's kind of waiting around, right? And then 3 o'clock rolls around, everyone's supposed to leave. And everyone's just sort of like looking at the clock like, well, no one else left. I don't want to be the first one to get up. So I guess I'll just keep working. And everyone kind of thinks that until eventually someone does get up. Now, this is called presenteeism. Actually, I looked this up. And this occurs when employees feel compelled to stay stay at work longer than necessary, often because they don't want to be the first to leave. And this can lead to a culture where everyone ends up working overtime, even when it's not productive or necessary. And this, again, places stress on the finances of the business. You're paying all this overtime, assuming you pay overtime. Even if you don't, it's putting stress on the workers, because they're like, well, I'm supposed to leave at 3 and I scheduled something to do on my personal time at 4, but no one's going to leave till 3:30, so I got to stick around. And then it gets this awkward sort of like, well, I guess I'm staying. I guess I'm just going to be late. It's not fun. Like, it's a mess. And I've definitely been in situations like this where it's sort of like, I guess I better fill out my timesheet with like, I may as well have a couple hours extra on the timesheet. So I guess I'll stay a couple extra hours. Meanwhile, I'm not really doing anything that's very pressing. I'm not sitting there doing nothing, but I'm also not exactly pushing our, bottom line up. I'm not exactly making the company profit. I'm just sort of sitting around.
So just as a baseline right now, I've done synchronous work strictly. I've done asynchronous work more recently for the past, like, probably 5 to 10 years now. I've been more asynchronous than I have been synchronous. So I have experience with both. And as we'll mention later in this episode, there's no true like, hey, this is only going to be synchronous and this is only going to be asynchronous. Most workplaces have some sort of overlap between the two. So you'll have some async and some synchronous. Even in an async environment, you're still going to require synchronous work to be productive. But overall, I think the shift ever since COVID, I guess, has been to more like a remote workplace. It's coming back a little bit to the office now, obviously, but for a lot of people, that async environment started for them when they shifted to that remote workplace, because remote work benefits most from asynchronous. And not only benefits from it, it kind of requires it, in my opinion. And we'll get into that with the next section about asynchronous work, but I wanted to kind of baseline that with where I'm at with asynchronous work. But for strictly synchronous work, I wanted to kind of add a pro and a con here as well. So with the pros, what I've noticed and what I kind of do with synchronous work is a lot of collaboration. That collaborative work is hugely from a synchronous work environment, right? So if you're getting on a meeting together and planning something out, if you're getting on a meeting and troubleshooting something with your team, that's going to be much more productive than going and typing your answer, doing your own work, and then 3 hours later coming back and checking that answer, and then, trying something else if you're troubleshooting something. That troubleshooting cycle could last for days in that situation. And I mean, in certain situations, that's okay. But a lot of times you want to get through things in one sitting, and synchronous work is hugely beneficial for collaboration. In terms of cons, Matt mentioned the time zone limitation, which is absolutely true. The other limitation that kind of you put on workers is some people are split between when they're more productive. And this varies pretty significantly for a person. Some people are more productive in the evenings. Some people are more productive in the mornings. And some people, I can't remember the word for this, but some people are more productive literally like morning and evening, but not in the afternoon, right? What asynchronous work allows them to do is work when they're productive, and then live their life when they're not productive and doing whatever else they want to do. If they're more productive 9 to 5, they work 9 to 5. A lot of times that's okay in asynchronous work, and a lot of people, they grow up like that, so they stick to that schedule, and that's fine. But the new shift of workers coming into the workforce have realized that, hey, we can kind of min-max when I'm most productive and when I can actually do work and focus. And now, like, I have a bunch of people even on my team right now that will do, 4 hours in the morning and then 4 hours in the evening, and then their entire day is free. And that's how they work. And they perform extremely well because that's when they're most productive. And by having a synchronous workplace and having a full sync requirement, you're limiting your existing employees from their full potential potentially. Right? Like, again, some people might be fine 9 to 5. Some people might be most productive in that 9 to 5 range, but there are certain people that aren't. And you're limiting their productivity by enforcing that synchronization.
I have this thing about that too, and it's a personal thing, and I'm kind of weird. Like, I kind of work all over the place. Like, just this week, like, I mean, just today, right now, we were supposed to do an after work sort of evening golf game on a Friday, which is, after work. And then it got moved, like the planning kind of got shifted around, and it ended up happening, today in the morning. And normally it'd be like, oh shoot, like, I'm gonna interrupt work, whatever. But I started finding out about how the plan was kind of becoming a little wishy-washy on the weekend. So I said, oh, okay, cool. And so I just literally worked for a few hours each day on the weekend. And then it's like, okay, so now I've done that amount of productivity so that today I'm working now. Obviously I'm talking to Mike right now, but like, if I couldn't have made it, because I warned Mike that, like, hey, I might get stuck in traffic, whatever, yada, yada. If I can't make it, no big deal. Like, I've shifted the work around. And my thing about all this is about, like, I don't know if this is going to sound weird, but it's like a sense of freedom. I had this like weird like revelation. I used to work for a factory in college, and I had this like weird revelation of like, man, I'm never going to be able to like go to the bank in the middle of the day. You know what I mean? And that really made me feel weird. I'm like, this is kind of bizarre. Like, I'm only going to be able to do errands or tasks or whatever on the weekend, which a lot of people, same thing, of course, but like when things are the busiest and when it kind of sucks, right? Like, sometimes things suck when it's like that. But I'm a golfer now, like I said, and so it's easier, and it actually takes less time for me to golf randomly in the evenings if it's the summer, or like sometimes on a random work day. And if that happens, like I said, I'll just do a little bit of work on the weekend, or I'll work a little bit in the evening. And now I'm actually finishing my golf game in, say, like 4 hours in a group, rather than like 6 hours, because you're waiting in line and, it's a busy weekend golf and everyone's, screwing around. It's super busy there. And so to me, it's just like, it's that sense of freedom of being able to go like, yeah, like I am available on Wednesday at noon because I've already finished, my whatever. I already finished my Webflow task. I already had my calls. I already did this and that, whatever. It's a personal like freedom thing. I don't know if you like kind of relate at all to that, Mike, but not being able to go to the bank at noon, just like something clicked in my head. And the reason why that particularly clicked in my head is because somebody said that to me on the line. We were working, and he's like, I can never go to the bank when they're open. And I was like, what do you mean? He's like, well, like the bank manager always wants to have a meeting with me about my investments at noon, and I can never go at noon. And I just thought to myself, like, oh my God, this guy's not gonna be able to go to the bank at noon for literally like 30 years while he's working. And I was like, that's very bizarre. What the hell is happening? And then I just like kind of spun out and was like, I don't want to do that.
I absolutely relate to that hugely. I used to work like a line cook at a restaurant, and they have very set shifts. So a lot of like during those times, you can't do anything. Like you can't step away. You can't do anything like that. Like you can't go to the bank, especially when I was working full time there and I was working regular shifts. Yeah, it was pretty much a 9 to 5. No chance you're going to get out. So I'm very appreciative of the situation that I'm in right now, or I guess we're in, Matt, where we can absolutely set our own hours. We're not obligated to anything other than the meetings that we set ourselves or like we agree to. And it's a huge bonus of being in tech, I guess, for the most part, or being a tech worker or being a programmer. Not every industry has that. So, a factory worker can't go to the bank at 12 unless they have weird shift hours, which, I mean, you can do. A doctor, same thing. They'll never be able to have that experience of that like really flexible schedule. They're going to work overtime most of the time anyway. So a lot of people are just limited to that very synchronous work life, and they'll never get to experience really the asynchronous benefits that we do. And I think about that pretty often, especially when talking to people that are in different industries. And I appreciate it more and more because, like I said, I've been working asynchronously for most of my career at this point. And sometimes I just take it for granted, for sure. Like sometimes I even get upset at it a little bit. And I'm just like, oh man, I wish I could go into an office. I say that fairly like, tongue in cheek, but the want to go into an office sometimes does pop up for me. The want to like have that synchronous work a little bit, or the more predictable hours, like you were mentioning for people. That happens every once in a while where I think like that could be beneficial, but there's positives and negatives and everything. And for me, the one thing, like the flexibility, that's a huge positive that outweighs most of the negatives of asynchronous work, honestly. It's not perfect in any way, shape, or form. Like we're going to mention some cons of it, and they're very real cons, but it's the positives that way outweigh everything that could possibly be negative about asynchronous.
100%. Yeah. So I think we should just dive in right now to asynchronous work. We've kind of teased it enough. And so what is asynchronous work? Well, asynchronous work is working together as a team on the same goal, but the workers do not need to be present at the same time. That includes online or in person. They do not need to be present at the same time. People set their own hours, or they complete tasks as they're assigned. So someone like a project manager, or just a manager, whatever, supervisor, will come out and be like, Matt, you do ticket 1, Mike, you do ticket 2, whatever, those type of things. And hours are often not tracked. Oftentimes, and this varies business to business, but oftentimes it's deliverable oriented. It's like, oh, Matt completed ticket 1, Mike completed ticket 2 in a day. Great, hooray, moving on. They're not worried about, well, hey, hang on, you completed ticket 1 and ticket 2 in 6 hours, and then you left. Why did you leave? Well, I didn't have any tickets. Yeah, but you're supposed to sit there. Like, it starts getting silly. So like, again, that's going to be one of the pros that come up, but it's more deliverable oriented. It's not hour oriented. They're not worried about like, you better be sitting here for 8 hours. The second point here is actually a weird one that I found, and I wanted to mention it here because I did a little research. So asynchronous teams are different than distributed teams. I always just kind of figured they were synonymous with each other, having not read into it before. So I'm going to just describe the difference right now. So asynchronous teams have no place to work together. So they don't have a place like an office or a business incubator or whatever to go to. They rely solely on remote tools to collaborate and work together. Whereas distributed teams are teams that have an optional cooperative workplace like an office. So this is very common if you say work for a business, they have a big office in the city, let's say. They give you a cubicle number, let's say you're cubicle number 1, but you can work from home. They don't really care if you use that cubicle. So that's a distributed team where your team's going to be all over the place. Like you might be up north, that person might be down south, this person might be here, there, whatever. But at the end of the day, the business could call in and say, hey, everybody, we got to come back to home base. There is a home base. So that's a distributed team. So workers can work async in a distributed team if their team allows it, and of course if the tasks allow. And this is basically them working from home or working on the road. But again, they still have like that sort of anchor location. They still have a place where it's like Matt is assigned to seat 1, Mike is assigned to seat 2, etc. So what are the pros of asynchronous work? Let's go through those. People make their own hours based on their tasks. So I've already kind of mentioned this before, and like Mike's mentioned a little bit here and there. It's a big one, big pro. If you are given a ticket and that ticket takes you 1 hour and that was your only task for the day, then I guess you're working 1 hour. Now, that's not to say that you can't take initiative and look for other tasks to do, look for things to do, and that you just want to work 1 hour. However, if you do legitimately have a busy day that day, whether it's running a side hustle, dealing with your kids, running around with family, or you're just super stressed out, I mean, there you go. You completed your task in an hour, go lay down. Go lay down, go play with your dog, whatever you got to do. You have the option to do that. And what's great about this is that, they're given tasks, but oftentimes a lot of stuff is on the table. So oftentimes it's obvious what the next task is going to be or what you should be prepping for. And so if you're like, hey, I just completed this ticket in 1 hour, I thought it was going to take 2 days. Fantastic. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to prep for this entire afternoon. And then tomorrow I'm going to work for 4 hours. I'm going to do prep work for 4 hours. Oh, I did a little prep today, a little prep tomorrow, and then I'm just going to take off early tomorrow. I'm going to go whatever, golf, run, go fishing, whatever the hell you do. So that's a huge bonus. A big bonus here, and again, this is per business, is hours are often not tracked. So there's no pressure to put in 8 hours if you're only given 6 hours of work. This is super important, and honestly, it makes synchronous work look foolish to an extent, because it doesn't make any sense for some manager, albeit I know that they're just chasing a metric and effectively following up. I can't say it. It's ridiculous for a manager to be like, hey, you completed that ticket in 6 hours and you're supposed to be here for 8 hours. Why did you leave, 2 hours early? You're just supposed to sort of sit there. You're not supposed to do anything else unless you were assigned it. You're just supposed to sit there, sort of okay. And this also is a point that it's a little bit outside of asynchronous versus synchronous conversation, but it is a point that hourly versus project-based payment people make all the time. Hey, that person over there is going to charge you per hour. I'm going to charge you per hour as well, but I'm really fast. So does that mean that I should get paid less because I'm better? There is that argument there. And I know there's a side argument of well, you could take more jobs. I get it. There's an argument there, but this is a part of that. Another pro here. Flexibility to work on side hustles or run errands, see friends, etc. during quote unquote work hours, as long as you finish your work. So again, you do have to finish your work, I would hope, or at least get it done to an acceptable level, and then you can go do stuff. So just like I said today, our plans kind of got wishy-washy, and we went out super early in the morning and did some golf. We were a little bit late coming back because the traffic was really bad. There's literally a bridge out, so we have to go driving around, and no big deal. Whatever. I come back, I check my emails, whatever. And then after this podcast, I'm going to go answer all my Slack messages and answer all my text messages. And that's it. There you go. I had flexibility to go see friends, do some golf in the middle of the day, in the middle of the quote unquote work hours. Devs, this one's for you. I've got 30 seconds to tell you about Wix Studio, the web platform for agencies and enterprises. So here are a few things you can do in 30 seconds or less on Studio. Integrate, extend, and write custom scripts in a VS Code-based IDE. Leverage zero setup dev, test, and production environments. Ship faster with an AI code assistant. And work with Wix headless APIs on any tech stack. Time's up, but the list keeps going. Step into Wix Studio and see for yourself. Link in the show description and in the show notes. Next one here. Talent pool is any country you're allowed to legally hire from, because time zones mean nothing in async. You can have somebody that is, 12 hours ahead. You can have somebody that's 8 hours ahead, 2 hours behind, 12 hours behind. It really doesn't matter. The talent pool is effectively anywhere that you're legally allowed to hire from. And this is great if you're someone who is literally looking for the best talent and you're like, hey, I need the best people. This is especially true for very kind of cutting edge projects, let's say. When all the companies, all the tech companies are going after something hey, AI is new, we need all the best AI people. Well, the talent pool, if you're async, is literally the entire planet for the most part. So there you go. You could find the absolute best AI people. And the final pro here is, if notifications are managed well, there are fewer interruptions, meaning more deep work and more completed deliverables. So this one is not so much controversial as it is kind of up to your team members, how the team is managed, how the task is managed, and how the project's managed. There's a lot of management stuff that kind of relates to this, I guess, and it affects this. Very, very commonly, when people are doing synchronous work, people are constantly creating new freaking meetings. They're calling you at your desk. They're tapping you on the shoulder, calling you when you're out and about, you know. They're trying to like schedule meetings for other stuff. Even if it's outside of work hours and, you know, it's later on, they're still trying to create the meetings for tomorrow. So you better have your phone on you so that you're able to see, oh, I better come in early because I got to have a meeting, this and that. Okay. But with asynchronous, if the notifications are managed well, there's oftentimes fewer interruptions and more of that deep work. This can be stricken from the pros list and made into a con very quickly if the notifications are mismanaged and you have a team that constantly bugs you, constantly trying to call, or again, using one of those monitoring softwares that I mentioned at the beginning of the episode, where they're constantly just like, hey, what are you doing? Why weren't you at your desk? I was going to the bathroom. Well, why was that? Why are you doing that? But stay hydrated. You know, it's stupid. Like, it's just office stupidity.
Can I just go on a little rant on the monitoring software?
Please.
I know companies that use them. Like, I know people that have that installed on their computers. It honestly feels like you're back in like maybe kindergarten. I don't even know if you were disrespected that much in kindergarten. It is a massive form of disrespect, in my opinion, to put that on someone's computer. It means that you do not trust your workers, period. Like, that is a very signal statement. If they say anything otherwise, it's bullshit. It means that you are trying to play the metrics game, which almost guaranteeingly will not work for a productive environment. You're just trying to prove something to someone, I don't know. And just flat out, like, if I were to be in an interview and I were to ask, how do you keep track of people's hours and stuff like that, and they tell us that, hey, we have this software installed on the computers, that would be a no-go for me. Unless I'm like desperately in need of a job, like, you know, different situations can put you in different situations. I'm not going to say that I'm never going to work for a company that does that. That would be ridiculous. But if I have any sort of capacity to make decisions in that situation, I will bow out respectively. It feels honestly like a slap to the face. There's no possible justification that I can think of realistically. Like, why can't you trust your workers, or can't you monitor their output enough to be able to then make a decision on if they're good or not? Like, it's almost demeaning to the people managing the workers as well, because you're telling them, the managers, that they cannot have opinions on how someone's work is going. Like, they should be able to tell you if, like, hey, this guy's slacking because he's not doing the work, not because he hasn't moved his mouse in 3 minutes. It's just such a strange, I don't know. I hate it. And I would go on a very, like, you know, intense tirade right now, but I don't want to do that. I want this to be very clear that it is wrong to put that on a employee's computer. And in my opinion, there are some stats to back up both sides, because there's big corporations that benefit from this on both sides. So I'm not going to go to the stats, but in my opinion...
Wait, benefiting from monitoring?
Yeah. Like, there are some stats to benefit them.
Okay.
Like, there's monitoring companies that put the software on there that will fund this research to make it seem like their software increases productivity, right? There is research to prove, quote unquote, prove that monitoring software increases productivity.
Right, I've definitely seen that. Like, I've seen the marketing pitch, I mean.
Correct, exactly. So that's the marketing pitch. And then there's plenty of research to prove that it does not benefit productivity. So there's research on both sides. That's fine. In my opinion, it definitely does not increase productivity in any way, shape, or form. It limits people's ability to work as human beings, and it just makes a more hostile work environment, period.
I 100% agree with you, but I understand the other side of the coin, just in that what they're trying to do is they're trying to make it like the office, where, like, you are kind of being monitored all the time. There's probably even security cameras in the office, right? And you're there, and if you're just slacking off, they're going to see you and tell you to not do that. If you're just, like, chatting with coworkers, they're going to see you and tell you to not do that, right? So they're trying to emulate that environment, so I understand it, but I disagree with it. I'm definitely in the camp of, like, we should be more deliverable oriented. Like, that's ultimately what you're trying to do anyway. So, like, why not, right? It's just silly. Like, it just doesn't make any sense. And here's the thing too, is I know there's going to be some people that say, hey, you know, I really benefit from a very strict structure and that's it. Great. Then do that to yourself. Put yourself in your own thing, and I don't know, have an alarm that goes off if you don't move your mouse or something like that. Like, if you're a person that's like, I'm going to put myself in this very strict framework, and therefore I'm going to become like a machine and be very, very good and productive. Fantastic. Most people, at least from what I've seen, most people don't want to do that. And actually it degrades them, or it degrades their work, excuse me. Like, not everyone has to survive in your framework. You must have a very rigid framework. Fantastic. Give yourself a rigid framework. There's enough software out there that does it. Go ahead. Do it. I don't know, have some discipline, I guess, like to stick to your own framework. Don't have it so that the manager has to tell everybody to do it. We're on cons now, right? Are we moving into cons? Yes. We're moving into the cons of asynchronous work.
Yes.
So, first con here. It can feel like you're on call, quote unquote, during busy periods, because you may be bombarded by messages, emails, and calls, and, you know, it's going to feel kind of crappy. And Mike and I talked about this last week, actually, where he's saying, you know, there's sometimes more intense periods, sometimes lighter periods of development cycles, and just, you know, a lot of work stuff too. Like, I mean, if you're an event coordinator that has nothing to do with programming, I'm sure that things are a bit hectic when the event is about to happen and when the event is happening. But if you're in between events, I'm sure it gets a little more chill. That's basically what we're talking about. So it can feel like you're on call sometimes because you are async. So a lot of people will keep their notifications on all the time. I don't do that because it really derails me and makes me go a little bit crazy, but I do check them a lot, and it's more than like 4 hours a day or something. It's more like 12 hours a day or more. Next one, varying expectations. So some managers may expect team members to answer within 24 hours, where others may expect a few hours. So with asynchronous work, sort of the rule of thumb is that someone will get back to you the next day, even a DM, especially if you're in different time zones, right? And this, again, will vary on what your team is doing at the time. Like if it's like, hey, everybody, we have a release coming up or something, maybe people are going to be a little more responsive. But different members, different managers, different team members are going to expect different things. They're going to say like, hey, like, even though you're in this different time zone, like, why aren't you answering me like the instant you wake up? Like, I know it's 8 a.m. and you've just woken up. Why are you waiting until 11 a.m. to message me back, right? So varying expectations can get in the way a little bit. And that can be due to task stress, right? Hey, this person emailed you or they DM'd you because they need something, you know, kind of quickly. And then you didn't answer right away or as quickly as you could have. You decided to wait a little bit and then message them. And then it's like, hey, what the heck? Like, why aren't you doing that? But it's like, that's async work, right? So varying expectations can kind of throw some teams for a loop. And, you know, if it starts getting out of control, maybe managers can come in and say, okay, the policy is, you know, 12 hours, 8 hours, 10 hours, whatever it is, 24 hours, those type of things.
I kind of want to jump in on this one because this is a pretty important point for asynchronous work. The fact that it's very variable and there is no like framework for it, quote unquote. There is no rule book that you follow that says like, okay, you have to answer within this amount of time. There is no one like implementing these rule books. And because of that, a lot of times you're getting traditional managers coming in and trying to set up a async work environment using traditional techniques. And then it's like, you know, they're expecting immediate responses, and that's not what async is all about. And that kind of ruins the async environment, and that kind of creates an extreme amount of tension in the team. So like with synchronous work, a lot of times it really comes down to how it's implemented, right? Like in a synchronous work environment, you can have people that are just constantly on you all the time, and that's going to derail you all the time. The same thing can happen in asynchronous work, almost like the opposite of what it's supposed to be, because we have a plethora, like a ton of managers that have come from synchronous, and we have a very small amount of like dedicated asynchronous managers, if you want to say that, right? Like there's not a wide enough breadth of talent to be able to create a perfect asynchronous work environment in a larger company, just because most people have not gone through it yet. So you're going to have a very, you know, hit or miss situation depending on who's managing you. And it can create a much more hostile work environment than you would be used to, which kind of sucks. But you have to kind of nip it in the bud. You have to be very communicative of it. You have to try to work with the manager, or if you're the manager, you have to try to implement something that works in an asynchronous environment. Like implementing rules about hours is kind of contentious for me. I don't like having to say like, hey, can you please get back to us in 12 hours? Because that implies that there's already been an issue. There's already been friction. A lot of times, you know, if someone hasn't replied in 24 hours, there's probably something going on in their life. That's most likely the case. Like obviously it's the weekend's the weekend. No, I would not expect anyone to reply in over the weekend. But the rule of thumb with asynchronous stuff is you should at least reply once a day. If you haven't replied in once a day, my assumption is that you're probably going through some stuff with family, you're probably health issues, whatever. So like that sucks, and I'll just reach out to make sure that you're okay. And if you're not okay, I'll try to make you okay, tell you to take time off and stuff like that. And 99.9% of the time, I have never had to put in any sort of like, hey, can you please reply at least once a day? If you just expect people to be normal human beings and good workers, they're going to want to, own the process that they're in and fix the situations that come up. And most of the time, people are replying within, an hour or two during their work hours. Everyone's work hours are different. If I notice it's outside of their work hours, I would never expect them to reply outside of their work hours, right? Like you set your own work hours, but you put them publicly so people can see them. And if you're away, you set your status as away, so I wouldn't expect you to reply. And if you're at your desk and you can reply within a couple hours, great. That's it. And honestly, like not having a framework is my framework, if that makes sense. Just allowing people to be, themselves and reply how they want to without having to conform to something that, some higher up put down on them. I feel like that allows them to be much more productive.
More productive, and it allows people also to explore ways to get the answers they need as well. Like sometimes you'll figure out like, oh, Matt prefers texting, Mike prefers emails, Bill prefers phone calls, this other person prefers, large phone calls with multiple people. Okay. And then you start kind of learning those things. And then you start to, dare I say, synchronize as a team in a way where it's like, okay, like this is what this person's going to give me as a response and blah, 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 blah. I'm going to go to this person for this. I'm going to go to that person. I know this person's going to take 12 hours. This person's less experienced, but they're going to give me 1 hour. So I'll message both of them and I'll get a less experienced answer and a better answer later. And at least I can get the ball rolling. And like, those are things that you only get from treating people like humans. And then they can figure out, hey, like this person does that. We do it with our friends. Some people prefer a phone call. Some people prefer a text message. The list goes on.
I think it's okay to have that variation as well. I think some people, again, they're like, oh, well, everyone has to reply this way. Everyone has to do this. I don't think that that's productive. Matt and I have kind of joked about this, but like we have like 15,000 different messaging apps on our phones because we've both given up. And that's kind of how I treat this as well, is like I'll adapt to everyone else's methods. Obviously, to a certain degree, I'm not going to be freaking telegraphing you answers. And I'm not like, you know what I mean? I'm not going to go back to the 1950s or 1940s. And, I'm going to expect you to use some sort of modern techniques to message. But as long as it fits within like the, video call, messaging landscape, it works for me. That's where I'm at. Like, I'm not going to make you download some random app and only communicate in that app or only communicate in Jira like some managers do. Like, I won't read anything unless it's a Jira ticket. Like, that's ridiculous to me. Like, if you want to have it in a Slack thread, put it in a Slack thread. If you want to email it, email it. It's fine.
I so want to telegram you now. It's unbelievable how much I want to telegram you.
Well, you could telegram me, just don't telegraph me.
No. Oh, well, wait. I'll use a telegraph machine to send a telegram. I don't mean a telegram message. Screw that. I don't even have that on my phone. I don't have Telegram on my phone. I'm talking to like using the telegraph machine. But what I would do, because I've only the only real show or anything that I have reference for telegraph is I would just like have to watch like Hell on Wheels and learn like train on left track, stop, do not go down left track, stop. This probably won't get you because it's the 1800s, stop. Get the newspapers ready for a disaster. Stop.
I can promise you I will not respond, but I will chuckle if I actually receive some sort of telegraph. I don't even know how I would receive that. Someone would have to come to my door and hand me a letter.
God, I want to do this now so bad. I want to do it for like a work thing though.
Like an urgent work message?
An emergent work message. And I would mess it up a bunch of times because I don't do this all the time. So I'd have to figure out how to do the like correction of like the brrr to like correct the last like it's this just in. Then that's how you reply in like the Slack or something or in our teams. This just in. Matt has reported being stuck in traffic. He's 5 minutes late. And
If you're sending me Morse code from your phone while in traffic, then you're the one causing the traffic at that point.
Oh no, I'm gonna have a big antenna on my car and I'm gonna just start tapping that boop, 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 boop thing. People are gonna start looking and be like, what the hell's going on? I just have this big antenna in traffic holding it out. But wait, how would I get you to also hold yours up? Because you'd probably have to hold yours up to receive it.
You would have to deliver it to my house. Like, you would have to deliver a receiver, a telegraph receiver to my house. And then I'd be like, fuck. I'd have to set it up to receive your stupid telegraph to tell me that you're in traffic. I don't even know if we're talking about the right thing. Like, isn't telegraph? What is a telegraph? Is that Morse code? I don't think that's Morse code, is it?
Oh, hang on, I'll look this up.
Get off on a tangent. No shit.
Well, there is the Daily Telegraph, which is a British newspaper.
Yeah, we don't want to talk about that.
The telegraph machine, electrical telegraphs were, point-to-point text messaging systems primarily used from the 1840s until, it's not even the 1940s, it's the 1840s until the 20th century. I'm down. I'm totally down. There's a Civil War text machine, the telegraph.
Text machine? Is it Morse code? Or is it legitimately text?
No, it's Morse, like, well, this picture is showing Morse code on a sheet. So it's like a long, elongated sheet of paper that's really thin. And it's like elongated, it's like, so what I'm looking at now is it's saying ... space ... hold. Yeah, oh yeah.
Please no.
This sounds like something I really, man, just to have a telegraph machine working in here though would be incredible. A Bluetooth telegraph machine.
I mean, you could do it with a Raspberry Pi, I'm sure of it.
Somebody get on it. I'm sure it's already done. I haven't Googled it, but I'm sure it's already done. Okay, let's move on here in the cons for asynchronous work. Over messaging. Over messaging is actually quite common. And this is just due to a bit of, like, I don't know, anticipatory anxiety, worrying that the person didn't get the message is often very common. So, for example, you send an email to a client or to a worker, like to another person on your team. You wait 12 hours, you don't hear back. So you're like, man, did they get that? So then you also send them a text message. That's an example of over messaging. That's obviously not that serious or severe.
Yeah, I was going to say 12 hours between two messages. Depending on the situation, I agree. In some situations, it could be over messaging. I don't know if that particular case is over messaging. I've had way worse.
That's a basic example.
But like, it's way worse than that. Like, sometimes it's every, depending on the severity of the situation, someone can frickin' blow up your inbox from different accounts.
You know what the worst is? When you tell people, I'm doing something, and I'm going to put my phone on Do Not Disturb. And then you, like, take the Do Not Disturb off. And that person, 2 minutes after you put Do Not Disturb on, has spammed the crap out of you for something. It's like, man, what do you mean? Like, it's on Do Not Disturb. I literally didn't get these. Come on, man.
Yeah, that's when you have a very grown-up conversation with that person and nip that in the bud real quick.
Or you start telling them that you're now going to start communicating with them via telegraph machine. It's that'll put a fix to it right quick. But no, my example is just an example of, like, one message turned into two when it shouldn't. Obviously, the real problem is when it's, like, exponentially more. Like, one message, which is only supposed to be one message, but turns into 10 messages. Like, that's a problem. And the last con here, and this is a very personal one. Like, this is totally person to person. But in general, extroverts may find remote communication a struggle on a personal level because they're not having those in-person interactions. But again, this is very, person to person. Some extroverts may love async because they don't care, sorry to say, but they don't care about their work colleagues. They have a bunch of friends that they want to talk to all the time. So they chat with them and they don't really care about the work colleagues. Again, very, very person to person, but this is absolutely something that does come up. And I have heard people say, I mean, especially during COVID, I can't wait to get back in the office. I don't talk to anybody. And I was like, I'm talking to people like crazy. I'm talking to too many people, actually. Like, it's kind of getting out of hand, actually, a little bit out here, because everyone's sitting at home texting, and calling and stuff. So it is a very, like, personal, like, person-to-person thing.
I think the biggest con, and you've already touched on it, and I've already talked about it, like the varying expectations one. I think for someone coming in new into asynchronous work, there really is almost no way to fully prepare for it because of how varying it can be from business to business, company to company, team to team. Like, I think that is the biggest con, is you can have a great experience at one company and you can have an absolutely horrendous experience at another one with asynchronous work. And it all comes down to how it's implemented. If everyone's bought in, right? Like, I've talked to someone when I was first kind of starting to kind of lead teams in asynchronously, I reached out to someone that was like an async guru, I guess. Like, they've been doing it for way longer than I have. And they do strict async. I've never done strict async. And what strict async is that there's no meetings. Everything is expected to be that, like, long turnaround time 24 hours is a normal turnaround time for a strict asynchronous work period, right? And they told me, they're like, when you actually embrace asynchronous work, you have to change your expectations. Like, you're not going to have that immediate, responses, and that's okay. Like, you can still do great work with that. Obviously, it's going to limit you in some things, but you have to accept the limitations. You have to accept the drawbacks of a true asynchronous environment to get the benefits of asynchronous work. And I thought that was a very good way to put it. And I've kind of embraced that as much as I can. Like, again, we still have some synchronous parts to our job, so I didn't embrace asynchronous the way that they did. But for the most part, I really did understand what he was saying, because it's like, you cannot expect this to be the same. You can't treat people the same as you would in a synchronous work environment. You have to adjust, and that's been the key. And a lot of workplaces don't do that. And that's why you see all these like companies, we're going back to the office because it didn't work out. It didn't work out not because of the workers themselves, usually, I say that with a caveat, but most of the time it's working out because managers just didn't put in that effort. And it really is effort. Like, it's not like, oh, we're all just going to be going home and working together. No, you have to set expectations. You have to talk to people. You have to make sure that everyone's on the same page. You have to, like Matt said, that like the over messenger, you have to sit down with an over messenger and explain to them what asynchronous means and how that works. And like, you have to nip it in the bud. Like, you have to have difficult conversations on a pretty consistent basis to make sure that no one is breaking that like cycle. And that's difficult. Like, that's really tough in a company to do that. And it's very rare when you have everyone buy in all of a sudden and have a perfect environment right off the bat. So obviously these companies, again, that are going back to office are pointing to all these situations that have arisen from the lack of, collaboration or whatever, and are saying like, we'll get better. Like, we'll go better if we go back to the office. But the reality is, if they put in enough effort, they probably would have been fine in a remote work environment. They just didn't put that effort in.
Didn't put the effort in, and also probably manager like types or managerial style was probably stuck in like the old school.
Exactly.
Obviously, and like ties to the old school is effectively your problem, right? Where you're just like, well, like, you're async, but still fill out your timesheets. It's like, well, I mean, I guess, like, again, like some companies will do that, but it's just sort of like, okay, but like, are you just wanting the timesheets just so you know what I did? Or are you trying to ensure that I did 8 hours, right? And then it starts becoming like, this feels very synchronous again, and then those ties of old kind of hold you down. Now, I do want to mention that asynchronous is not usually fully async. I know Mike just gave an example of that, but async, like very, very commonly, async is not always async, and synchronous even is not always synchronous. Asynchronous and synchronous usually live together. So like in most things in life, it's not A, it's B, it's somewhere in between. It's the gray area, right? A little bit here and there. What is asynchronous and synchronous together? Well, what it is like, for example, if an async team meets for calls, right? Or they ensure their availability to cooperatively complete a goal, like a specific goal that requires multiple team members, that's a synchronous task, for example. So like, that's an example of sort of the gray area. Another one is some async teams will have some loose work hours. So let's say that Mike mentioned, hey, Saturday, Sunday are off. Like, you're gone those days, right? Like, you could, I guess, work, but like you're gone those days. So Monday to Friday you work, right? This is to ensure that collaboration moves forward quickly and burnout is staved off. So you're like, hey, take these 2 days off. Hey, do this. Hey, do that. These days are the ones you work, etc. So that's a little bit more on the synchronous side, right? It's in that gray area, but it's a little bit more on the synchronous times. And synchronous teams, right? Not asynchronous, synchronous teams will often have async messaging after hours, right? Or will work sync with their local team and async with an international team. So just to clarify that, because I kind of said it quick, you'll work in an office, let's say let's say you're a team of 10. So you'll all work together and you're 9 to 5 and you're a synchronous team. You work 9 to 5, you leave. But let's say you work in a huge conglomerate, a large enterprise, your asynchronous team may be international. They may be, in another whole office, another whole city, another whole culture, wherever. And due to time zone differences, you're going to work asynchronously with them. So your synchronous team is going to work asynchronously with more than likely another synchronous team. So not everything is just fully like, yeah, we're full synchronous, we're full async, unless you very specifically go to like the gurus, like Mike was saying earlier. So let's answer the question. We've gone through it a bunch. We've talked about it a bunch. We've gone in there. Mike's made a couple of notes here. Does asynchronous work for web developers. And I've broken this up into two questions. We'll go through them briefly here. First one here is, what synchronous work would benefit web developers? So what does that mean? So like, what specific work things would be great specifically for web developers? The obvious thing is, the odd phone call, of course. Sometimes it starts getting a bit messy when you're trying to text people, like Mike said, or like you're trying to text people back and forth when you're troubleshooting, or when you're trying to do something cooperatively. It doesn't have to be an emergency. It could just be like, hey, this is a 2-person job, and you're doing 2-person job, and it can be a bit of a pain to be DMing back and forth. It works to an extent, but sometimes, boom, you want a phone call. That's synchronous, right? Working on things cooperatively, of course, like I said, 2-person job. That's another thing where that's a synchronous task that works great for web developers. But, that's nothing new. Like, most jobs out there have certain tasks that are 2, 3, 4-person jobs. And so those people will work synchronously because it's a 3-person job, 4-person job, etc. Now, Mike, you wrote some like more kind of drilling down into programming specifics. So why don't you let us know what sync work would benefit web developers?
Yeah, absolutely. So this comes down to the first one here comes down to junior developers, new developers getting into the game. A lot of times my recommendation for new developers is to look for a synchronous job first, if they can. Like, it might not be available, whatever. Like, obviously look for both, but if you have the option between two, synchronous will benefit new developers more because the onboarding process, the mentoring process is just way better synchronously. Being able, like Matt was mentioning, like being able to tap someone on the shoulder and ask questions is a huge bonus of synchronous work when you're first starting out. Now, on the flip side of it, like for a developer that's, doing the mentoring, unless they're a good mentor, like that might annoy them a lot. So you need to kind of balance it out a little bit, ask them what their preferred, like how they can signal to you when it's okay to do that and when it's not. So you're not pestering them. But overall, being able to be one-on-one with someone, go through the code together really quickly and just bounce ideas back and forth is going to accelerate your developer career way more than usual async environments. So onboarding, mentoring, I think are very key in the sync workspace. Another one I have here is pair programming. So this one, some people might have a little bit of a negative connotation to this, but overall, I think pair programming is a very good thing. What this looks like is essentially one developer maybe has an issue and 2 developers jump on and try to tackle that issue together live on like a screen share, right? So in certain situations that could be seen as fairly like stressful because you're coding in front of someone and you're screwing up in front of someone. But if you have good trust with your team and you are confident in your own skills, this shouldn't be a huge issue. The caveat here is depending on how you take pair programming. I think some people just really, really hate it. And I think it's okay to state that. Be like, hey, I don't perform well in a pair programming session. There's nothing wrong with that. If that's you, then, just let everyone know that that's what you're in. And maybe they can, get you to just be the eyes on the session instead of being the one that's coding. Maybe they can coach you up a little bit on how pair programming works and get better, or maybe they can just keep you out of those sessions to make sure that you don't stress out too much. There's many different ways to handle that, but overall, I would suggest you kind of try pair programming because just seeing someone else code or coding in front of someone else, they'll notice things that you don't notice. And a lot of times I've learned my best tricks, quote unquote, on like shortcuts and little like snippets that people use and how they set up their web development environments and stuff like that have carried over to my setup like immediately and have made me a better programmer. So just seeing someone else code in real time is kind of a really big benefit. And obviously you can't do that asynchronously.
It's also a validation if you are like a new developer too. Because like if the person's like, I don't know if like this is how other people do this, like my task works and my ticket is complete, but am I a damn fool? I mean, this will give them some validation or invalidation and things to correct.
Exactly. And I think like being able to receive that feedback is really, really key. And being okay to receive that critical feedback is really, really key. And I know it's like, it sucks sometimes and it's scary or whatever, but realistically, like the faster you get that like correction or even the validation, the better you'll become. Right. Like, so yeah, very good point, Matt. Like that, just that instant validation, really, really important. Instant correction, really, really important. Last thing I have here, there's many different synchronous benefits, but the last thing that really like applies to synchronous is war rooms. So what a war room is that when something goes wrong, like ridiculously wrong on your app, so for instance, the database crashes or the site crashes, like a big crash that affects many, many people, a war room will usually be opened up. And what that means is that everyone gets on a call together and everyone just starts troubleshooting together. Like, so, the developers will check their stuff, the DevOps team will check their stuff, the marketing people will be there just to see like what they need to message out to the public about it. And so like everyone is just on the same page while the triaging is happening, while you're getting the fix in place. And this is tough. This would be really tough to do in like full async environment. So I think war rooms are just something that you need to have as part of your expression. Hopefully you don't have very many of them. I can count on one hand how many we've had in the last year and a half. I believe it's 3 war rooms. So like it's not very common that this would happen, but it's a good tool to practice, have, and be able to execute like, synchronously together.
Well, the big thing there too is like this is exactly how an IT team would work. Because like a war room immediately like brings me back to the times of like, hey, we have like a step-1 incident or an incident that needs to be dealt with right away, and it's like, okay, everyone drop whatever ticket they're working on, whatever project they're working on. Let's try to dive into this. Matt, you grab logs. Mike, you grab the logs on this other machine. I'm gonna go down there. I'm gonna make sure I call you via my phone. Make sure you call, or hey, like I'm going down to the data center. The phone calls won't work, but emails will. So like you like all coordinate. And it's like, okay, now break. Let's go do our stuff. But like we're still constantly and actively updating each other on like, hey, I got the logs. Look at this. Hey, I got these logs. Look at this. Hey, I'm down in the data center now. What do you guys want me to do based on the logs? Like that's very like synchronous. And go. And I understand that's IT and not web development, but it's the same idea. So that's what synchronous work would benefit web developers. What about asynchronous work? What type of tasks in async would benefit web developers? So I wrote down a couple here, and one of them is, we've already discussed this, and that is that you get more deep work hours. If the notifications are kept at bay, you're not constantly being pulled into synchronous tasks, specifically meetings and calls and all kinds of other garbage like that, then you get more deep work hours. And with developers, a lot of the time, they'll be given a big ticket, a big task, and they'll be like, okay, I have to get to work on this. And nothing, kills productivity more than constantly someone either literally tapping you on the shoulder or figuratively by constantly calling you, constantly DMing you, constantly texting you, whatever, right? More deep work hours. Now I do want to point out something that's beneficial of async though here is that async, people can reach out to you at any time. So you might say, well, hey, if people can reach out to you any time, they're going to interrupt your deep work hours. But because it's async, you can put your phone on do not disturb and then do like 3 hours of stuff. And then there you go. There's your deep work hours. And then you can answer in 3 hours because it's asynchronous work. And that's a huge thing. Absolutely. And then you can also have a policy like, hey, you want to book a meeting with me? I have a Calendly link, or I have, whatever, Microsoft Planner or something, whatever. I don't know. I don't know if that's even the right software, but like I have a Calendly equivalent. Go in here and check that out, and it'll sync to my calendar. And if I have something like a doctor's appointment or something on the personal side, it'll automatically block out those meeting times. And like, I'll get an email right away. And so if I can't actually make that meeting, I'll just reach out to you, right? Not that big of a deal. So like async works great for deep work and allows you to defer, like use my calendar link, DM me and all the rest of it. But I'm going to be gone from 2 to 4 every Tuesday because I'm just going to like quickly bang out a whole bunch of code. The second thing that I've written here is that a lot of teams work on tickets. They're given Jira tickets, they're given whatever, a bunch of different softwares out there, Spiceworks, who knows, whatever else, doesn't matter. You're given tickets. Hey, fix this. Hey, fix that. Hey, build this, build that. Here's a work order. Here's an incident. Here's this, etc. Very similar to IT in that way. Async works great for tickets. So basically the manager oversees the tickets. They basically say, okay, I'll assign them out. Or I'll indicate, hey, we have 2 tickets that our web development team needs to take. I need 2 web developers to take them by noon today. You log in before noon at that day and you claim a ticket for yourself, right? Those type of things. It works great for tickets. And then the ticket, if it's written properly and whatever, and the actual task is managed properly, will give you enough description that you should be able to start working on it. And you might be able to work on it that night or the next morning or whatever, again, asynchronously. And then in the next meeting, you're not like, oh, like I had to wait for Bill to do this and that. You are able to start getting work on your tickets, again, if managed properly. So asynchronous work works great for things like that. Go into a portal, accept ticket, 2, whatever, accept ticket 2. Okay, ticket 2 is due at this day. It needs to be fixed for this reason. It's blocked by this. Okay, immediately I can reach out to this person to get it unblocked. Hey, it's not blocked. I can immediately start getting coding. And you figured all this out because somebody, not at the same time that you went and looked, asynchronously put together a ticket, and now you're going in and asynchronously working on the ticket. So it works really, really great for tickets.
I think for programmers, like web developers, asynchronous work is just great for work. Like to get the bulk of what you need to do done, which is programming.
Agreed.
Like you said, deep work, tickets, like that's all related to just actually the core part of your job. And that's why, as web developers, we kind of lean towards asynchronous work because we see the benefits of it for the best part of the job. The 90% of what we need to do or 80% of what we need to do every day is benefited from asynchronous work where we can just sit at our computer without any distractions and pump out code to finish whatever task we need to finish. Any sort of outside noise, outside thing that comes in could be an immediate distraction that could, derail you for hours potentially. Like context switching is not easy. Being broken out of deep work, getting back into deep work is not easy. I kind of equate it to like meditation a little bit, and this might be a little bit out there, but like to get into a meditative state, it takes you a long time. And it's the same kind of thing with deep work. Like you have to kind of force yourself into deep work a lot of times. And when you're there, you're there. Like you're just kind of knocking out stuff that you need to knock out. But as soon as someone calls you or like you hear some commotion down the street or down the office, like in the office, you're going to be broken out of it. And that constantly happening is going to limit your productivity pretty significantly. So for getting work done, that's where async work shines. For all the other stuff, or not even all the other stuff, for a small subset of the other stuff that we mentioned above in the sync work stuff, sync work still is beneficial. So like the meld of the two, where it leans more towards async with like allowing for some sync work, that's what's worked great for me. And that's probably what I'll continue with because again, like I like having situations where you can collaborate, but 90% of the time async is great.
And I would say too is that with developers, web developers, a lot of our work is finite. Meaning you go in and you're like, oh, I got to build this page. I got to build this web app. I got this web app. That's a finite task. And some office workers have infinite tasks. There's literally, unless the business is closed down, they constantly need to make phone calls. They're constantly chasing leads. They're constantly doing stuff nonstop. Whereas web developers, unless the business is just like absolutely popping off and there's just tasks coming in left, right, and center, once you've completed a project, the project is complete. Maybe the project is complete. And that's great for ACE, right? You get in there, you're like, okay, let's just get this done. And that's the beauty of it is some web developers will be like, I don't want to work on this next week. Let's get this damn thing done. Like I hate working on finance apps. Let's get this ticket done. You go in, you just get it done this week. And now next week you're done it. You don't have to do that task again. And that's great, again, asynchronously, because instead of you being like, well, I'm not going to finish it in my 9 to 5, you just be like, I'm just going to work really hard this week because next week I want to chill a little bit. And that's really great for, again, finite tasks where last 3 weeks ago now, as of recording this, I'm crazy couple of weeks where I was launching stuff left, right, and center because a bunch of stuff that was pending kind of all came to fruition at once. And I think I mentioned this on another episode. And so asynchronously, I was like, okay, good thing I'm asynchronous because I can't answer everybody. Everybody in line, we're going to go in. I'm going to go and get this stuff done as quickly as I can. Boom, boom, boom. Get this done, get this done, get this done. And now actually just like even into tomorrow, like recording this, I actually have calls for the end of that line. Like the queue is starting to go away now. And like the intensity went down as of like last week, 2 weeks ago. And then now it's sort of like back into like regular calls, regular this, regular that, because it was just like, okay, get all this done. But if it was like, hey, I'm working for 3 clients, but each of them demand 9 to 5. It's like, okay, well, I literally can't do that because like everyone needs me all at once. Like it is not possible for me to do that. So asynchronously speaking, when working on projects, again, finite projects, once you've completed them, they're completed. Short of maintenance and stuff like that, which is more semantics and maybe not even on your plate. It might be on someone else's plate. Once the task is done, the task is done. You can only develop a slider so many times. You can only put so many nav bars together for somebody before it's like, that person no longer needs a nav bar. They've got it. Bing, bang, boom. That's it. It's over. But I think that's it. I think the conclusion here, basically, just to sort of sum it up in a statement is, does async work for web developers? Yes. And for the reasons we just said. Does synchronous work for web developers as well? Yes. But Mike and I prefer async, and I think a lot of other web developers, at least the ones that we talk to, do as well. But you may be in a different situation where you think synchronous is way better, and you probably have a great reason for that. So please reach out on social media and let us know. I'm running the Threads account. I've been threading, I guess, a whole bunch. That sounds really weird. I don't like saying that. I don't like saying that at all. I'm on Threads. Let's be clear. I'm on Threads, the social media network. I've been posting on Threads quite a bit. So if you have anything you want to say on there, you can't DM on there, but you can at me or whatever the heck you do. You can tag me, and we can have a conversation on whether you think sync work, async work, etc. is better. Mike, you run the Twitter at HTML Everything. So if you want to reach out to him, you could DM him, or you could tweet at him, or X. Almost said X him. Threads and X. What's going on here? I don't like saying that either. Anyway, you can go and talk to Mike on X about this as well, or I'm also on Instagram if you want to DM or anything like that. But that concludes this episode. Remember, we're on Patreon, the patreon.com/HTML, all the things. And many thanks to our $3 tier patrons. Tim from the Web Hacker, thewebhacker.com. Jason from Geek Life Radio via geekliferadio.com. And Garrett Segal, Level Up Financial Planning via www.levelupfinancialplanning.com. Joshua via Silvio.us, and Magnus from YesWeb via yesweb.se. And we'd like to give a shout out to Michael LaRocca, a contributing author on HTMLallthethings.com. Michael is the author of Self-Taught, the X Generation blog at selftaughttxg.com. Feel free to leave a comment or review on the platform that you are listening to this on. And this outro will sign us off.
You've been listening to HTML All the Things Podcast. Web development, web design, and small business. We hope you've gotten some useful and practical information from this show. And we hope you appreciate that we talk to you like human beings. And we hope you had some fun. We'll be back soon. But in the meantime, hit us up on social media. On Facebook, Instagram, and Patreon at HTML All the Things. And on Twitter at HTML Everything. Until next time, this is HTML All the Things, signing off.